Get rolling. Okay, well, just welcome everybody. My name is Evan Anderson. I'm on the 20th reunion committee for our class. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome everybody here to the class of 2002 sponsored back to school program featuring Linda Rodriguez McRobbie, one of our classmates. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few Zoom keeping items. First of all, everybody's been muted. You're going to be muted throughout the event because we're here to hear Linda's thoughts, and we'll all have a chance to chime in at the end and have a chat then. If you're comfortable with it and haven't already, please change your Zoom name to your first and last name. You can do that by clicking the participants button at the bottom of your screen, hovering your mouse over your name, and then clicking the More button. You can add your Davidson class here if you have one as well. The chat feature is going to be available during the talk. However, Linda will not be the one monitoring the chat. I'll be the monitor, and as well as Grace Ward, one of our Davidson representatives. And if you have questions for Linda during the presentation, send them through the chat to either Grace or myself, and we will collect them and share them with Linda during the formal Q&A period at the end. In addition, we've enabled the live auto transcription for the call. If you'd like to enable it on your end, hover over live transcription on your screen and the subtitles should appear. Note that this is AI computer wizardry and it may not be perfectly accurate, so just hold on for any bumps that you see there. If you have any technical issues, you can send a chat to Eleanor Cross-Young, our other Davidson rep here, and hopefully that will get you going. In the meantime, I'll turn the floor over to Linda. She's our 2002 class member that she went to Columbia School of Journalism right out of college, got a master's in journalism, and she's worked for a few newsrooms, right? And now you're a freelance journalist for the last 10 plus years. She's authored a couple books, and she has a wide breadth of knowledge and talent that the bookshelf in front of her would illustrate, not necessarily the pictures behind, but I'll turn it over to her
now. Thank you so much, Evan. I really appreciate that. And yes, I'm Linda Rodriguez McRobbie, class of 2002. I am possibly the only English major from my year who didn't become a lawyer. I did, in fact, become a journalist. So I am here today to talk about curiosity. This is something that is near and dear to my heart as a journalist, and it's something that I really feel like undergirds not only my experience as a journalist, but also my experience at Davidson and pretty much sort of entirely after. So to start off with, I am going to give you a little assignment, and I will give you a few seconds to accomplish it. I want you to think of 3 things right now that you are curious about. This can be literally anything at all. The neuroscience of hoarding, or the habits of crows, or why unicorns became suddenly hugely popular in the last 15 years. What makes a person good or just or friendly or mean? What is the Eurovision Song Contest, and why does it exist? It was just this weekend, and it was a very big deal here in the UK. So if you can, grab a piece of paper, write these down, because I'm going to ask you about them at the end of the talk. So I'm going to give you a second, 15 seconds, probably less. Give a countdown. Okay. Now, just to think about it now, did you struggle to come up with something? Did you struggle to come up with 3 things? Did you struggle to come up with only 3 things? Now, here's my caveat. This was not exactly a psychosociological test that professionals do. It's not a valid assessment of your personal level of curiosity. It's really probably more of a test of your ability to come up with random lists in a short and totally arbitrary amount of time, or to make disparate connections between things. Anyway, whatever it assesses, it's probably not curiosity. but it is a useful introduction to what I'm here to talk about today, curiosity, why we have it, why we need it, and how to get better at it. So, what is curiosity? Now, curiosity, as I said, is something that absolutely drives and undergirds my life. As a journalist, I am professionally curious. It is my job. I get to write about everything from why reports of alien abductions are on the decline to how the Great Fire of London was blamed on religious terrorism for literally centuries, how the experience of pain is created in our minds and our bodies, and what it's like to live most of your life in an iron lung. Now, this is also why my bookshelves that you cannot see are absolutely overflowing, and I have a real problem with buying books on Amazon. But to the degree that you can ever really separate your personal from your social life, curiosity is also much of what undergirds my personal life. I mean, I live in England now because 13 years ago, my then boyfriend, now husband, was like, hey, I'd like to live abroad sometime. And I was like, sure, who wouldn't? And now I have a mortgage on a 400-year-old house that's falling apart and 2 children who say castle instead of castle. So, be careful what you agree to. In any case, curiosity is a basic fact of my life, and it's a basic fact of being human. It's implicated in how we learn, how we make decisions, how we make memories in our development from a very, very early age. And I think we can all see on a basic level why curiosity is important, why it's a necessary part of human advancement, and not, just because I moved to England because of it. There are lots and lots of examples. Like, what if our ancestors hadn't thought, let's just leave this malt and hops and water and just see what happens. But what exactly is curiosity? Curiously, we don't really know. Curiosity is one of those Supreme Court definitions of obscenity kind of things. It's, you know it when you see it or when you feel it. And we humans, we feel it a lot. I mean, consider how much of the global economy is driven by information and experience seeking. That's like new shows on Netflix all the time, social media, news media. We love, love, love new sensations of all kinds, from the foods that we eat to what we put on our bodies. So clearly we are curious, novelty-seeking animals. But we're only just now really getting to grips with the underlying biologic and neurological mechanisms behind curiosity, and evolutionarily what curiosity gives us, why it's adaptive, why we need it to get what we need. So studying curiosity is, as you can probably imagine, difficult. So how do you shove somebody in an MRI and be like, be curious? It's hard to design experiments and create laboratory conditions that can manipulate curiosity or even measure it. How do you differentiate necessary information-seeking behavior, say a rat trying to find its way out of a maze to get to a piece of food, from curiosity, which could be that same rat peeking above the maze walls just to see what's there? Or how do you differentiate curiosity from play or different kinds of learning or exploration or neophilia, just really being into new stuff? How do you differentiate being curious from risk-taking behavior? Is curiosity a basic drive in the same way that the desire for food or shelter or companionship are? Now, these are the kinds of questions that philosophers and behaviorists have been grappling with for centuries, and the neuroscientists and cognitive scientists are working on right now. But here is what we do know. Curiosity is a state of cognitive arousal that propels the individual to take actions to satiate that arousal. So basically, you see a gap in your knowledge and you are compelled to bridge that gap. Now, contemporary scientists and psychologists believe that what differentiates curiosity from other kinds of information seeking is that it is internally motivated. So this means that we want to learn about something because we want to, not because there's some tangible gain tied to it or some other force, say a history professor or a parent, telling us to. This, however, is somewhat controversial because how can you measure motivation, especially in, say, animals or nonverbal people? And can't we also have overlapping motivations? You want to win the poker hand for sure because you want to make the money. You want to not lose the money at least. But are you also motivated to find out what cards are on the flop? There are also, so these are the kinds of questions that thinking about curiosity comes up with. But there are also very, very broadly about 3 different kinds of curiosity. There's epistemic curiosity, which refers to the search for conceptual knowledge. That's like learning, education, further reading, that kind of thing. And there's perceptual curiosity, which is an interest in sensory experiences. And this is a really big, important one. It's kind of the cornerstone of how we get into curiosity from a very young age. Now, this could be everything from wanting to know like what it feels like to eat Pop Rocks and drink Coke at the same time, or be like my 8-year-old son who just can't not touch the stuff despite being told over and over and over not to. He just can't not. He has to touch it. There's also social curiosity, which is an interest in the feelings and the thoughts of other people. This is sort of an emotional, connective kind of curiosity. And you can also slice curiosity into specific and diversive, which is pretty much what it says on the tin. Specific is aimed. It's the desire to know about a specific thing. And diversive is more diverse. It's the desire to learn more about more. But these kinds of descriptions do more to circle around the idea of curiosity rather than actually define it. Other more recent scientists have proposed that it's more useful to consider curiosity as a behavior under 4 distinct rubrics, or to look at it through 4 different lenses. And those are function, evolution, mechanism, and development. So function gets a bit at why we need curiosity, what it does for us. And one very strong motivator is memory. Now, the super short explanation is that curiosity is implicated in how we form stronger memories. And this makes sense, right? You're more likely to retain information about things that already spark your interest, things that you were curious about in the first place. But what's really interesting is that studies demonstrate that being in a state of curiosity not only improves recall of the information that you were curious about, but also other information gathered at the same time. So what that implies is that the state itself is associated with forming stronger memories. Neurally, curiosity maps to increased activity in the midbrain and the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is, I'm sure you've probably heard of it, but it's incredibly important, and it's a super complex brain structure that's located in the temporal lobe. And this little guy is called the hippocampus because it looks a little bit like a seahorse, like if you sort of squint. But it, along with its buddy, the amygdala, are vital in the formation of memories. The more activity, more or less, the stronger the memory. So anything that lights up that region even more is going to be recalled more clearly. So anything that puts you in a state where that area is just pinging is going to be recorded or encoded more clearly, more strongly. Now, this has obvious implications in learning. Now, curiosity has been called the wick in the candle of learning, and I love that because I feel like it's a really wonderfully accurate phrase to describe what the state of curiosity can do to learning. Numerous studies have found that curiosity, when engaged, enhances learning. And this is in line with the idea that part of the function of curiosity is to facilitate learning, to help us seek out new and useful information and retain it. Now, one of the really interesting things that I learned in the course of working on this is that people are most often curious about learning things that are difficult, but not outside the realm of possibility of achieving. Concepts that are in the area of proximal learning. It's like something they know about, but haven't totally mastered. So like for me, I'm much more likely to, pick up a new knitting stitch than I am to start deciphering string theory, because knitting is a lot more possible for me than string theory. But even more fun is how this relates to the phenomenon that we all know and have experienced, the tip of the tongue thing. That word or that answer or that celebrity name that's on the tip of your tongue, and you can feel it, it's there, but you just can't remember it. So we are, studies demonstrate, much more curious about that answer than about stuff that we had no idea about. So in any case, this is sort of like a weird thing that I loved about learning this. But another deep function of curiosity is to reduce uncertainty. Uncertainty doesn't need to produce anxiety, but we are driven to resolve it in part of because of what is frequently called the negativity bias. And basically, we humans learned early on that if something could cause us pain or is dangerous, then we ought to pay attention to it. It's one of the reasons why we're often drawn to negative stories, why true crime is so popular. But part of this is because we need information to tell us how to act, what to do. And that information that might keep us safe, is super valuable. So when we perceive something that doesn't fit into our existing knowledge structures, we need to make it make sense. So we become curious about it, and we try to acquire new information around it to resolve it. Now, learning and being good at learning have some clear evolutionary advantages. Seeking out new information means better choices. It means being able to acquire things that we need more easily, and of course, to avoid danger. All of the sensory information and processing equipment that we possess, our visual cortex, our stunning array of neurons in all different kinds of stripes, our very efficient nervous system, all of this stuff is pointed towards being better at taking in and using information. Curiosity, when considered through the lens of evolution, seems to have some very clear advantages. If we're primed to seek information all the time, then seeking information that doesn't have a clear payoff, but that could prove useful later, is likely to be evolutionarily preferred. But, and this is just a brief sort of soapboxy aside, this is something that a lot of the scientists that I've talked to for pieces that I've written have taken pains to really underscore to me. So I'm going to do it here. Evolution does not intend. And what this means is that evolution is not a process by which we become more perfect, or we iterate until we reach some kind of platonic ideal, or even just a slightly better version. Evolution is a quick and dirty way for species to survive long enough to reproduce, and that's about it. So sometimes we have some weird quirks of evolution that don't exactly have a clear purpose, but they don't hurt either, or that we're not entirely certain why they exist in the way that they do. And curiosity, I think, is an example of evolutionary incentive being a bit murky. So information seeking is great, and it's really important. It's something nearly that all organisms do in some fashion, from viruses to rhesus monkeys. But there's also a downside to curiosity. Just ask the proverbial cat. Curiosity can also imply making risky choices, behavior which wouldn't always confer an evolutionary benefit. In fact, it could be pretty problematic. So somewhere along the line, we balanced the benefits of information seeking and mitigated risk against both the fear of and reality of consequences, and we got curiosity. Yay, us! But how does curiosity work? As in, what are the mechanisms that make curiosity happen in our brains and our bodies? So there's been a fashion for like at least the last 20 years, if not way longer, to locate everything in the brain. Jealousy, love, need to eat ice cream, reasons you love reality TV shows. And this is, I think, at least tends to be overly reductive, right? Neural structures aren't they're not single use. It's not like this guy here. This is my sort of favorite prop, if you can see him. This is my Phrenology Head. And basically, this guy represents a very early 19th century version of trying to understand the world through the brain. But what it really was, because obviously they couldn't, take a look inside your skull without killing you. It was reading the bumps on the outside of your head to get some sort of sense of what kind of person you are. So there's some really fun stuff like, desire to drink strong liquids is over here, and like loving animals is over here. And this is a fun idea, but it's not quite accurate, for lots and lots of reasons. But basically, different structures within the brain work in tandem with others to create networks of neural activity. And that produces the effect on us, whether that's emotional, physical, whether that's the experience of pain, whether that's the experience of joy or pleasure. All of these things are part of an interconnected network that comes together to create that experience. So with that in mind, curiosity is implicated in many of the deep structures in the brain, implying that it's a drive that taps into some really basic behavioral modes. It's a thing that we've been doing for a really, really long time. Now, I mentioned that there are some areas of the brain that are more active than others when you're in a state of curiosity, such as the hippocampus and the fornix, which is the white matter bridge that connects the thalamus to the hippocampus. The nucleus accumbens is also implicated in high states of curiosity, although not always. And this is where things get even more confusing. So, for example, when you're answering trivia questions, the nucleus accumbens is more active the more curious a person was about the answer. But when measuring self-reported curiosity, basically when people sitting in an MRI were like, oh, that's interesting, that was associated with activity in the caudate nucleus, which is next door to the nucleus accumbens, and in the inferior frontal gyrus, but not the nucleus accumbens itself. That is weird, but it's interesting because it definitely creates a more complete picture of this very complex experience of being curious. In any case, the neurochemical reward, dopamine for one, definitely plays a role in curiosity. And I think this part is really cool. And I feel like it also sort of reinforces my feeling that curiosity is so incredibly important for so many reasons. But basically, neuroscientific studies have demonstrated that our subcortical reward structures, these are the guys that dole out the dopamine and all those other sort of fun neurochemical cookies that make us want to do more of whatever thing triggered it. Those structures treat informational value, so the resolution of your curiosity, the thing that you got from being curious, the same as any other valued good, any other basic need. So when I say that curiosity, information, is as basic a need as hunger or love, that's kind of what I mean. I don't think I'm totally wrong there. So curiosity seems like something that we humans more or less ship with. Like straight out of the box, infants exhibit information-seeking behaviors, which soon turns to curiosity and the desire to stick literally everything in their mouth, everything. Now, this bent towards perceptual curiosity is a necessary part of human development and of giving our budding nervous systems processing data to work with. And you can see how important that structure is, how important being curious is from a very, very, very early age. But how does curiosity develop? So for children, a big part of that is play. It's trying out behaviors and risk and scenarios and situations where risk is mitigated and in ways that are more or less safe. Children are also attracted to problem solving and to play that enables them to understand causal relationships. So you put the marble at the top of the run, it rolls down and it comes out at the end. Magic. Trying to figure that out is super exciting to kids. Studies show that young children also enjoy toys that they need to figure out, that the underlying mechanics of it are not clear. So thanks to our big brains, we're able to take information gained through the process of figuring things out and translate it to future needs. And you can already see how this learned behavior, this behavior that's building on a behavior that's somewhat innate, is incredibly important to how we learn things later on. So curiosity is rewarded by gathering useful information from a very early age, and that comes with those fun neurochemical rewards. So we all know that kids are curiosity machines. This is part of how they're figuring out how to be human, how they're simultaneously reading, writing, and rewriting their How to Be a Person handbook. But what about us, as in us adults. To prove yet another animal-based proverb wrong, you can, in fact, teach an old dog new tricks. So we used to think that we could neither create new neurons or repurpose existing ones. And all we old people could do is just sort of stand idly by while our neurons died by the millions, diminishing us daily. But that is not true. While neuroplasticity is most definitely at its peak in our childhood and juvenile years, we can, in fact, grow new nerve cells into old age. And our nervous systems can keep learning new tricks until we die. New tricks like how to be better at being curious. So this is what we do when, for example, we train to run a marathon. We are retraining our nervous system, teaching it new habits and tricks, and teaching it how to manage pain, how to manage discomfort, things like that. And we're creating new relationships with incoming sensory information. And this is also, I mean, for obvious reasons, this is hugely important in keeping us healthy as we age, not necessarily running a marathon because that's really hard, but like exercising our nervous systems, our sensory input, our brains, everything to just keep these things ticking over and learning new stuff. So I think that one of the habits we need to frequently retrain ourselves on, especially as we get older and we think, well, I've already got a lot of information to work with. What do I need more information for? Is to be curious. And like I said at the beginning, I am professionally curious, and this is my job, and I love it. But through it, I've also found that there are better ways of being curious, and ways to get more out of being curious, and ways to practice being curious. So, one of the things that people sometimes ask me is, where do I get my ideas? And I love this question because it's so easy to answer, and I really like having the right answer. Ideas are everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Now, this isn't the same as, say, like noticing stop signs are red and thinking, well, why is that? And then getting paid to write 1,000 words on stop signs, which I would love to do if anybody wants to pay me to do that. Although I would, like I said, I would be super interested in that. But the point is when you start to look at the world as a series of questions and not as just facts or answers or just things that are, you can start to see ideas and connections and concepts and uncertainties that need to be resolved. Now, my husband has told me in the past that sometimes when I tell him I'm working on this idea or that idea, he's like, how is she going to get a story out of that? But in the end, there's always more to it than just that initial why. So one of the ways to be better at being curious is to not just stop at the first question. It's a little bit like starting a fire. With curiosity, you've got to work at it, and you've got to be compelled to ask the next question, to say the who makes it, who benefits, who decides, who wants it. And then you get into the what is it? What is it made from? What does it do? And then the where did it start? Where does it live? Where does it go from here? All of these come together to create a more holistic, more interesting answer, more compelling answer than just, well, stop signs are red because that's a color we notice. Well, this is also in part about how we ask questions. Now, I think that one of the most important things and a way to ask questions is to ask it without already anticipating the answer. And I think it's good to even be surprised by the answer. Now, this one sounds super, super easy, but honestly, it's really, really hard. Like today, like how many conversations did I have with my husband or my kids today where I asked a question pretty certain that I already knew the answer? Like, did you finish your lunch today? No, I never do. And I know that those conversations could have gone differently if I genuinely approached them from a place of wanting to be informed and not assuming that I already knew. Another thing that I've learned professionally is the power of silence. So I imagine that you were probably like, what the hell is she doing? But it was a bit awkward. she frozen? What's going on? But this is one of those journalism 101 tricks that actually really, really works. And you probably already heard of it, but it really, really works. So basically, when you're asking someone a question, ask the question and then stop talking. Listen to the answer. And even if it gets awkward, and even if it seems like they're done answering, resist the urge to jump in and fill that silence or to comment on any way on the answer. Just wait a beat or maybe even two. It gives you a chance to think, of course, and to start to digest what they've said, but it also prompts them to just keep talking, and it is magical. People hate silence and gaps in the conversation, so they'll just keep going to fill it, and some of the best and most interesting stuff is in there. So, related to how we ask questions is another tenet of curiosity, being open. Now, this means being open to viewpoints and experiences that contradict what we already know, being ready to be wrong and to resist the urge to think, well, that's different to what I know and I believe, and therefore I'm just going to ignore it or it's bad. And I find this, like, I'm not going to lie, I actually find this hard to do in my personal life. Like other parents on the school run, I'm probably judging you. I'm sorry. In my professional life, it's way easier because I can talk to someone on one side of an issue and think, oh, well, that makes sense. I have sympathy for that. And then I talk to someone on the exact opposite side of an issue and I think, well, that also makes sense. I also have sympathy for that. Now, ultimately, that ends up making a better end product, although the process of getting to that end product can be a little bit messy. But this also means that being curious is often an exercise in gaining perspective and in seeing the world and your position in it differently. Now, that can hurt, but it's always beneficial, I think. So, some other quick lessons in curiosity. First one, don't be afraid of what you're curious about. Like maybe do worry a little bit about what ends up in your search history, but it's okay to be curious about things that are socially taboo or weird or dark or just feel a little bit uncomfortable because you learn more that way. And there's nothing wrong with learning. Be curious for the sake of being curious. Now, it's easy to want to find out stuff because it's pertinent to us or we have an agenda or we have money on it or anything. It's less easy to be curious just for the sake of learning or just for the sake of knowledge or learning something without a vested interest in the outcome. So don't restrict curiosity to things that will benefit you or make you a better person or earn you money or earn you kudos on Instagram or anything like that. It is worth it to have these experiences without having a vested interest in the outcome. Now, this is another one. Be physically curious, because I know that a lot of what I've been talking about seems like epistemic curiosity. It seems like the stuff that we're learning about, or even social curiosity, wanting to know how other people think and feel. And one of the things that we can tend to ignore as we get older is physical curiosity, perceptual curiosity, new physical sensations. And this, I think, is incredibly important. So a few years ago, I was working on a book about the experience of pain with an American sociologist. Now, she, very brief aside, she came to me after reading an article I'd written about the history and psychology of clowns being scary. And that was one of the ideas where my husband was like, say what now? But as it turns out, a lot of other people also want to know why and how clowns became scary. And now I am reliably called up to be on TV segments and podcasts to talk about clowns. And that is not what I went to college for. In any case, the book was an exploration of how pain is made and how we experience it from a neuroscientific, psychological, sociological standpoint, and what kinds of experiences shape our consciousness as humans. And one of the things that really shook out of this process was the revelation at the time that I was not a very physically curious person. I just didn't do much at all, although if you'd asked me to, I probably would be up for it. But writing the book gave me an excuse to try to do new things with my body that I hadn't done for years. So I decided to start swimming and then running, and then I started to do both a lot. And that is also how I ended up swimming the English Channel last summer. Not the whole thing, just on a relay, but a good part of it. What I learned is that being able to stay curious about how I was physically living in that moment was a very useful way of managing the discomfort of, say, swimming 5.25 miles or running a 10K. I don't love running, but I do it a lot. But it's part of the experience of just sort of thinking, okay, well, what if I just kept going? What's next? What's beyond this current instance of pain or exhaustion? And I can say with certainty that exercise is not terminal. And for me, being curious about how this next thing would feel has meant that I've done things that I never really thought I would or could. And that includes, of course, swimming the channel. It's very, very cold, and there are a lot of jellyfish. So, along the same lines of being physically curious is being emotionally curious. And we have so many emotions. We are capable of so many emotions, but we don't really always let those emotions have the space to just be and to not put any value judgments on them when we have them. And tied into this is being curious about yourself. Why are you asking the kinds of questions that you're doing? What do you really want and need? What matters to you? And is there a way to frame your needs and the things that you want in ways that are different? And I think being curious and being curious about the real answers is a really important exercise in getting the most out of your life. So I'm going to wrap it up now, but final story. So when I was in my junior year at Davidson, I went on Davidson's program in India and Nepal, and it was absolutely one of the best, most foundational experiences in my life. And it taught me a lot about myself and about resilience and about other ways of living and how to think about things that are different from what I know or what I thought I knew in very useful ways. And in particular, it taught me about standing on chairs. Okay, so bear with me. One afternoon, Sarah Ganayadek, now Carter, and I were in our room at the guest house in Chennai, and it was hot, and I think we were like working on something. It was probably around exams, and we were like getting sleepy, and I don't remember which of us actually did it, but we ended up standing on our chairs, and suddenly the world was a different place. Elevating our perspective, like just 2 feet, changed everything. It changed how we felt, what we saw. We saw the tops of the wardrobes, which was not so nice, the floors, seeing out the windows. We felt better. And this was a trick that I ended up doing again every time I was sort of getting a little bit tired or it was something, it was sort of an easy shift in perspective. And it was curiosity. What is it like to stand on a chair right now that got us up there? What could we see differently? So standing there, taking in new information was energizing. We literally saw things differently, and that felt good. And I think a lot of ways going to Davidson was a bit like standing on a chair. Davidson taught me a lot of things, like how to think, how to investigate ideas, but it also taught me the value in trying to see things differently and being curious about different perspectives in a non-judgmental way. So remember the 3 things that we thought of at the beginning of the talk. What do you think about them now? Standing on your metaphorical chair, what would you do differently? Now, I'd love to hear some of these ideas, and I promise I won't steal them for articles unless they're really, really, really good. And maybe I'll quote you on it first. I don't know. But I'd love to hear. So if we maybe get to the questions now, you can say if you have any questions.
Sure. One comment came from Laura McCandlish. She said, "Great chat, Linda. I think another side benefit of curiosity is that it helps to counter polarization in bridge building conversations across our growing divides." She linked to looks like a New York Times article and then a new book on the topic as well.
Absolutely. I think that's incredibly important. And I think it also sort of stems from the idea of when you ask a question, being open to the answer being different than what you expected.
Feel free to throw any comments or questions you have in the chat. One question I had with all the parts of the brain talk that you are obviously very well acquainted with, I was sort of expecting you to get into dopamine hits of curiosity or something like that, and it made me sort of wonder whether there was, different curiosity, like these big questions that you can figure out in your own world existence versus just wondering something and then Googling it on your phone.
Yes, and there definitely are. So dopamine is definitely one of the neurochemical rewards that's implicated in the process of being in the state of curiosity and in the resolution of that curiosity. But it's not all curiosity is created equal, right? So it's really hard to get at what those differences are. Even a definitional standard for curiosity isn't widely adopted across all disciplines. So, psychologists may talk about it differently, sociologists might talk about it differently, neuroscientists do. They also all talk about different sort of forms of things that are sort of curiosity adjacent, stuff like wonder, which is a really exciting and interesting topic, or, play and different kinds of learning and things like that. But I think what a lot of evidence is pointing to is that there are different kinds of different structures in the brain that are implicated in different kinds of curiosity. And those will have different neurochemical rewards or different neurochemical feedback. And so obviously, like, dopamine is the big kind of reward that we get for a lot of this stuff, but there are definitely others, like serotonin is a good one. And even like, adrenaline and all of these kinds of endogenous opioids that when you have, physical experiences as well that are released. So I think the short answer is that yes, there are different, and the other short answer is that it's still developing.
Has technology had an impact at all on curiosity over the years?
I think I tend to take yes, because like the very short answer is, we have the ability to know so much more than we ever did before, and to have our questions answered in, like today at dinner, my son wanted to know how to say hello and yes in Polish, and I was like, I can do that. That's amazing. So, being able to get to the bottom of these little mysteries super quickly, in some ways it means that we don't have to work as hard. So, there's kind of diminishing returns involved there. But at the same time, it does mean that we get to be curious about a lot more stuff. So I take a kind of more positive view of the abilities of technology, the ability of technology and modern communication technology to just enable us to indulge that curiosity and foster that curiosity in ways that might not even have been possible 20, 30 years ago.
One of my favorite Calvin and Hobbes series is when he asks his dad questions. He'll be like, why does the sun set? And his dad's like, oh, it goes into Arizona. He's just like, all right. There's a nice part of curiosity and maybe not getting the exact answer you're looking for.
Or like finding out later that it's not your parents were lying to you all along.
How about animals? Is there any evidence that animals, curiosity obviously killed the cat, but what other kind of animalistic curiosity is out there?
So and a lot of different animals a lot of different, all animals, really, all organisms exhibit some information seeking behaviors. What we would consider curiosity, I think, is exhibited by a number of sort of the higher order primates, but also even like crows, for example, which are some of the most clever birds. They're incredible. You know, they exhibit behaviors and information seeking behaviors that aren't necessarily tied to an immediate tangible result, which pretty much fits kind of the working definition of curiosity. And we're learning so much more about animal cognition than we ever did before. And I think there's some really interesting stuff that shakes out of that. But right now, so on Instagram, I follow a number of dogs that use this facilitated communication device. Now, like, I have some real thoughts about this because I don't entirely know that it's like, how much is it sort of wishful interpretation on the part of the owner and how much of it is actually the dog or the cat, because I actually follow a cat that does it as well. But basically it's those buttons, and each button corresponds to a word: food, outside, bark, dog, whatever, name, and they're putting together sentences. So with things like that, you certainly see instances of animals exhibiting what could be likely termed as curiosity. And some of those things are much bigger than, I hear a noise outside. What is it? It's, like, why am I sad? And, it's really interesting. It's a really interesting potential glimpse into animal cognition and the ways that animals exhibit that kind of behavior. But again, I think, there's a lot more and more rigorous scientific testing that needs to be done before we really say that's what's happening.
So on the think of three things quiz that you gave us earlier,
Why don't dogs have feathers?
I defaulted to ones that I've had like a long-term curiosity about, and part of me, like, I know the answers are out there. I just haven't gone specifically looking for them because I kind of like the fact that I don't know the answers on them, right? Like, it's just kind of fun not to know some things.
That is fun.
I'll point to microwaves as alien technology for the rest of my life. You put food in a box, it comes out warm. Who knows?
It is magic.
Right. So, but you obviously, like, I have these few long-term things that I've always wondered about. You obviously, hit hot button questions all the time. There's a lot of fun stuff that you've mentioned in there. Is there other ways that we can, practice and get better at being curious, or some people just not curious?
So whether, like, it is a really open question about what kind of trait curiosity is. Is it something that, certainly there are some people who are more curious than others. It's just, but how innate a trait that is, and what are the early experiences that you have that can foster curiosity or shut it down? And even things like culturally, socially, things that you are allowed to be curious about and things that you're not allowed to be curious about, how those are received. So it's a very open question about what kind of trait it is. But I definitely think that that looking at the world from a perspective of seeing it as questions, as seeing it as things that we don't know the answers to, is very much a way to practice being curious. And you can get better at being curious. And I think part of it has to do with what your default mechanism is. So, for me, and this is certainly a consequence of my job, I literally look at everything and think, okay, could that be an article? Like what could I get out of that? Like, is that going to be something that I can turn into something bigger? And like the notes in my phone, the notes app is just full of like really random stuff where I'm like, and then like 3 years later, I'll come back to it and be like, turnips? What did I mean here? Is this a grocery list, or like, did I have an actual question? So, but I think that like, I'm very lucky that professionally, this is my job, to be curious about stuff. But I think that as soon as you are looking at the world around you with an eye to what more you can learn about it, is you're already engaging in the process of being curious. And the more you are curious, the more you do that, the more it'll happen. And the more you just keep doing it. And then it just becomes the thing that you do.
I think it's a good way of looking at the world. You seem to ask different questions than lawyers probably do, looking around the world, but that's fun. All right, if we're kind of nearing the end of the chat question Q&A time. So if you have anything, Charles, I know you have a question in there somewhere, but if you guys have anything you just want to throw in the chat to ask Linda, now's the time.
I just wanted to. Well, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I just wanted to say thank you. It was a wonderful chance to just hear something totally different from anything I think about on a daily basis. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in. It's good to see you.
We have a question from Alistair McKay, class of 15. Maybe a bit of a generalizing question, but is perceived intelligence correlated with curiosity, or is that more information retention?
I think that intelligence questions are difficult to answer because there's certainly different ways that people learn things, and sort of standard intelligence measures tend to be pretty problematic, right? But if generally speaking, the mechanism by which we learn stuff is improved by being curious about it, then the more curious you are, the more likely you are to retain and learn that information. So if we're looking at something that's sort of a strict, like, how well do you retain this information? People who are naturally curious about it are going to retain it better. So, it does confer, I think, an advantage in that sense. But there's also a lot of work in things like early childhood education around fostering curiosity in children and finding ways to allow them to be curious about the information that they're being taught in order to help them learn it better. So that gets into sort of pedagogical methods of fostering curiosity. I would hesitate to say that it is correlated with intelligence. But if it does come down to sort of being able to better retain information, again, if you're more curious about it, you are going to retain it better. So.
Question from Eleanor Cross Young. She's curious about what you're still curious about. What are you going to dig into next?
Oh my God, I'm curious about pretty much everything. Well, at the weekend, I just published an article about true crime and why it might be beneficial for us. This was after noticing that basically true crime has been around for pretty much ever. From the very beginning of mass media and well before, we've always been really interested in bad things that people do. So that was one that I did recently that was really fun to do. And I'm hopefully going to have a podcast coming out soon about pets, because I'm also super interested in the weird little animals that we live in our house and, knock things off our counters when they're hungry, like our cat does. What else? I'm sort of looking around my office right now because I've got a lot of books around. I've got a big story that I'm working on right now about the legacy and impact and history of kinetic impact projectiles, which are rubber bullets. So that'll be a really big one that's hopefully going to come out this summer. And it's meant that I've had a lot of really sad conversations with people who've been really injured by them. But yeah. I think what else is around here. I don't know. I'm really glad that you can't see just like the stacks and piles. Like the other thing, before I had notes on my phone, I would just write little pieces of paper and sticky notes everywhere. So like I still for some reason save those sticky notes because I'm like, oh, what if I forget this idea? So like I came across a piece of paper the other day that said something like subprime mortgages, cockroaches, and there was a third one on there that I was like, the hell was I talking about? Like, it's basically like my life is if you just woke up from a dream and wrote down the first thing that came in your head, and then you woke up the next morning. Like, this is what I find everywhere. I'm like, oh. I don't know what that's about.
Fruit by the foot was the last thing on that list, I think.
Yeah, probably fruit by the foot. We don't have them here. We call them winders. So it's not fruit by the foot. It's called winders.
fruit by the meter.
We don't have, it's like there's like a difference between an imperial foot and an American foot, and they're different.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for taking the time to speak with us today and leading us in the conversation. I want to go ahead. I want to extend a big thank you also to the class of 2002 reunion committee. Dave Oxner was here. He's one of the heads. Rachel Smith, a bunch of other classmates. We've been working hard to put together a good reunion this summer. The reunion committee is sponsoring this event. If you're in the class of 2002, or if you're in a reunion year this year, remember to register for the reunion by going to davidson.edu/reunion. Finally, thanks to everybody for joining us today, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their evening.
Thank you, guys. It was great to see you. Bye.
Everybody.